Our next guest is also from the Energy and Environmental Research Center. You get a twofer today on EERC. Bethany Kurz, hydrogeologist and the lab analysis group lead there. Hi, Bethany. How are you?
I'm well, Scott. Thanks. How are you?
I'm good. Thanks for joining us. What is a hydrogeologist? What is your job? What do you do?
Well, I guess traditionally a hydrogeologist is somebody that works with various water-related issues, whether it's groundwater, water resources, water contamination. That's some of what I do, but I also do a whole lot more than that, I guess. I'm also a geologist, so I do a lot of work with looking at Bakken water management as well as looking at Bakken rocks and how we can get more oil out of the Bakken, and I guess a whole array of different activities.
We wanted to talk a little bit about water management, and you mentioned that. First of all, I think it's worth sort of doing a third-grade explanation here. But when we pull oil from that rock, we also pull up salt water, right?
Yes, that's correct. I think a lot of people don't realize just how much water is involved in oil and gas production. I mean, I think the general public realizes that we need water for hydraulic fracturing, but perhaps they don't realize just how much water is produced along with the oil. So here in the Bakken, for every barrel of oil we produce, we're producing about a barrel of water as well. And you're right, it's brine. It tends to be really salty. So in the Bakken, it can be 10 times saltier than ocean water.
And so that comes up from down that far down. That's how the water down there is. If you think the ocean is salty, you got to like double it, right?
Right, exactly. So as oil companies, they're as much water handlers as they are oil handlers, and so you need to do something with that produced water. We are very fortunate here in the Bakken region in that we can just take that salt water and inject it back into the ground, not into the Bakken, but into different subsurface layers, so to speak, that just have a tremendous capacity to accept that wastewater. Many areas of the country don't have the luxury of having the geology that we do in order to dispose of water. So we are very fortunate here in the state to have the water disposal options that we have.
And the reason, I've seen one particular situation that's decades old, but it's a bad one up around the Antler area where there was a spill and the salt water went in a pretty good swath. Basically disrupted the production that was happening in that particular area because the reason this is important and what we do with this is that if that oil ultimately touches any agriculture area, it's difficult to clean up. Correct me if I'm wrong, and also does long-term damage to the growing ability of that particular area. Right. Right.
You're correct, and it's funny because in your produced water, so you're right, you have some residual oil in that water, but also the salt, and so. Believe it or not, I'd much rather deal with an oil spill than I would want to deal with a saltwater spill, a brine spill, because they are a lot more difficult to clean up, and you're right, they can adversely affect your soil and affect agricultural production. So it can be problematic, which is, again, one of the reasons why we're lucky we can just inject it down into the subsurface. And, one of the reasons why it's challenging when we talk about options, can you treat this produced water? Can we reuse it? One of the challenging things about that is where do we store it, those large volumes of water? Where do we store that safely so that we can treat it or do whatever we need to do to that water for reuse? And so that's one of the challenges we face in the state, if we start to contemplate reusing that water.
Yeah, so this is important. This is why, this is dealt with in the manner it is. And when you talk about the sheer volume, when you think about, the amount of Bakken oil that comes out of the ground, million barrels of oil, how much water has to be dealt with and how much of that is done safely, securely, it really is extraordinary. And obviously you always want to do it better, but I think that gets lost sometimes. Last question for you, Bethany, before we let you go. What do you see around the curve? What is coming in this area of water management in the Bakken that most excites you?
Well, we continue to be active in looking at options for treating that water and possibly even recovering things of value within that water. So we have a Department of Energy funded effort right now that's allowing us to build a brine treatment test bed where we can evaluate some of these existing and emerging water treatment technologies for water treatment and to see if we can recover anything of value. For example, there's some technologies where you can actually take that produced water and turn it into hydrochloric acid, which is used in well operations, or potentially recover lithium from Bakken-produced water. In some areas, we see lithium concentrations that could be economically recoverable. So I think, to me, that's exciting. Since we're already taking this water, we're already handling it at the surface, are there things of value that we can get out of that brine?
Fascinating. Well, appreciate the update. Thanks for the thanks for the good work you're doing, and we'll stay on top of hearing as much as we can about the latest innovation. Thank you, Bethany.
Yes, thank you, Scott. Have a great day.
Gosh, they do good work at the Energy and Environmental Research Center. Always learn a ton when we talk with them. Hydrogeologist Bethany Kurz there. When we come back, Randy Chrisman from the Public Service Commission on Energy Matters.